Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
All right, the next plant we're going to tackle is Salvia gregii. This is a shrubby perennial, but the key to keeping this plant compact and bushy and blooming well is to trim it extremely hard in February. So it will grow to be about 2.5 to 3 feet wide, but every February we're going to cut it down to 6 inches tall. So you can use these shears. You can use mechanical hedge trimmers because it doesn't need to be pretty. You can just chop it off. If any of the stems are too big to cut for the shears to cut through, you can use loppers or hand pruners. So all I do is come in here and chop it off. And the pruning police aren't going to come and measure 6 inches. Somewhere between 1 foot and 6 inches is good, just to get all that old growth off. If you don't do this, the plant tends to get very woody and rangy, and sometimes it can split in the middle and then it just doesn't bloom as well. So if you'll do this every February, this is one of my favorite perennials, and it just performs amazing when you do that. Okay, so we're going to do the next one. Same way. And there you go. Awesome. So now we're going to talk about perennials, and the first one I'm going to show you is, this is Katie's Ruellia, or dwarf Mexican petunia. I have one interesting way to prune it. When it's really dry and crispy in the wintertime, you can just step on it a lot of times and it'll snap right off like that. But we haven't had a super hard freeze, so it's kind of still halfway growing. So then you can just come in and you cut that down at the ground, right down to the ground, every stem. And then that comes back from the base of the plant, the crown of the plant. And you can weed while you're pruning. Sometimes they just snap off when you're pulling on them. So that's it. Just clean all that up, get off that old debris. And as soon as it quits freezing, they're gonna be right back up. Okay. The next plant I want to show you is May night salvia, Salvia nemorosa, Salvia superba, a couple botanical names. There are other varieties in this line like Snow Hill, Blue Hill, East Friesland, May night, April night, so any of those in that category. So you can see how we have all these spent frozen blooms up at the top. So you just take your hand pruners and come down to the base of the plant, right at the crown of the plant. A lot of times you'll see new growth coming already down at that base. So you just go down there and cut them all off right down at the ground. And my tip on this perennial is you can come in the growing season, and if you have some blooms still going and you have some spent blooms, you can come in here and snip off spent blooms here and there. Or the way I do it is when I have more spent blooms than current blooms, I just chop the whole thing to the ground again. So that way it sends up all even new growth and will just bloom profusely again. The next plant I want to show you is Purple Heart. This is a variety called Pale Puma Purple Heart, or Tradescantia, or Sutcretia pallida, I believe is the botanical name. So on this plant, sometimes you can just come in there and break it off with your hand like that. You don't have to be neat about it because it's just going to send up all new growth and cover all that, but just snap off those old stems down to the ground, or you can come in there and cut them. They really snap off easily. And the cool thing about this plant is you can, during the growing season, you can just take the cuttings and stick them in the ground. As long as you have a couple leaf nodes underground, you got new plants, and free is good. Again, this one usually, when we have a hard freeze, it will freeze all of the stems, and there's no mistaking what you need to remove. But since we haven't had a sustained freeze this winter, there's still some green growth on it, but I still would cut it down to the ground every February to get it ready for all new spring growth. So just rake through the old stems there, get all the debris off, pull a weed or two. So there you go with that. And you can see how hard, this is that May night, you can see how hard I cut that all the way down to the ground. So, but that will send up all new growth as soon as it's done freezing. The next plant I want to show you is catmint, or nepeta. This is a variety here is Walker's Low, and it will grow, as you can see, about 4 feet wide. It only grows about 2 feet tall, but very wide. This is a plant I like to use instead of lavender because it gives you that same look. But anyway, so you come in here, and even though it's grown 4 feet wide, you're going to cut it back down to 6 inches, or really kind of to the ground. Just cut back down to, you'll see a rosette of growth at the base. So hopefully when I cut this back, you'll be able to see that. So I'm just going to come in here and start cutting. Yes, I can see that new growth down at the bottom. Oh, and it smells good when you're doing it too. So fragrant. The foliage is so fragrant. Try to keep your fingers out of the way when you're snipping. Not that I would know anything about that. So, I don't know, can you see right here at the base how we have that new fresh growth coming out right there? See that? And down here at the base of the plant, all new fresh growth. That will start growing as soon as we're done with freezes. And again, we'll fill back out to that 4-foot lavender blooming perennial. So there you go on that one. The next one we're going to tackle is Palace Castle Artemisia. Excellent, fragrant foliage plant, but it grows very large, 4 to 5 feet wide. This is that Palace Castle Artemisia. You can see how wide and sprawling this is, but we are going to cut this back down, way down at the base of the plant as well. And you may need your loppers to do that because some of the stems on this are very large. So you're thinking, where do I start? Just start chopping away and you will get to where you need to. So just come in here and start cutting those big stems away. So you can see some of the stems I'm cutting are quite large. They do cut very easily though because they're a softer wood. I mean, look at the size of that stem that got cut. Don't be afraid to cut that. Yes. They do this every year. And yes, it leaves a lot of space around the plant. But what I do then, in fact, hopefully you can see this, is I like to plant daffodil bulbs underneath these plants, because when they're cut back in February, then there's room for the daffodils to come up and do their show. And then when they're starting to fade away, then the perennials will be growing up and covering them up. So you kind of get that great tag team effect. So somewhere between, 6 inches to a foot is where you're going to cut this back. And then again, that will just, all those fresh cuts will start pushing new growth from the base of the plant. And again, it will be 4 or 5 feet wide. The next perennial is Zexmania. Love this plant. It is so drought tolerant, so heat loving. Where it's placed right now is southwest exposure, and it just blooms its head off all summer. But it does go completely dormant back down to the crown. So all of the old growth gets cut off. I don't mind leaving this through the winter in case there's birds that want to come and forage off the seed heads of this. But you just come in here. You can use shears or you can use hand pruners. Sometimes when you're pruning, you might get some new baby plants. So you can pull those out and plant them somewhere else. Cut them back, plant them, and see if you can get a new free plant. Also, I don't know if you can see right here, this is another plant that I like to underplant with daffodils because it's cut back in February. The daffodils come up, bloom in March, and then the perennial Zexmania is starting to grow back. It will cover that up. You can let the daffodil foliage fade naturally. Okay. This is Salvia gregia. We've already demonstrated that over there. Ready. This perennial right here is Snow Hill Salvia. It's in the same family, the Salvia nemorosa, as the May Night. It gets cut exactly the same. You can see the clump of the crown right there, and then this is all the old growth. So I'm just going to take my shears and just chop that off. And just get right down to that crown. And again, there's I think 3 or 4 of them in here. I'll cut all those down, get all that debris out of there, and they will all send up new growth when it's done freezing and bloom white, spike-like blooms all summer long. This perennial here. Let me clean this debris away. This is pink skullcap. So it stays fairly evergreen, but what I like to do with it in this time of year is just give it what I call a haircut, just to kind of tidy it up and get off any of the little ends that maybe had a little damage. There are some years when we've had sustained temps maybe in the 20s that it will freeze deeper in and you can cut it off at the ground. But this year when it's been so mild, I just give it a haircut. So literally just come in with the shears, give it a haircut to kind of cut off any of the tips that have had a little freeze damage on them and just tidy it up. You can see some of the pink blooms on it right here. It will bloom profusely pink all summer long. There. Just a little tidy up. Okay, next I want to show you lamb's ear. This is a variety called Helen von Stein. It does not bloom. It's also called big ear lamb's ear. The other one is little ear. It spreads more, it blooms, and I'm not crazy about the bloom, so I prefer this variety. It just stays tidier. So, but that's not very tidy. So what we do in the springtime is you come in here and you can just take it with your hand and pull away any of the brown crispy growth, and it smells really good too. But you can see down at the base of the plant, you see all that new fresh growth coming. So you just want to come in, if there's any thicker old stems that you want to cut off, you can do that, like here, if I can get in there. So you can just get that old woody stem off of there. You can actually plant that. These will root and give you some free plants. But don't be afraid to cut this back hard. Just go in there and clean it out and get down to that nice, clean, fresh growth that's coming. And you may have to do this a couple times during the growing season. I know like in the summertime, it will have some brown growth on it. Browning, so you just cut that off, or you can just pull it off in the summertime. Just come in there and clean it up with your hand. So it doesn't look overly lovely right this minute, but I know that all of this growth at the bottom will be growing and flushing out as soon as the growing season is upon us, and it will look awesome after that. So there. Ready? Okay, the next perennial I'm going to show you, it's called four-nerve daisy. Hymenopsis, I think is the botanical name. So this one here, you can see how this one over here, I hope you can see, is mostly in bloom. This one here is mostly spent blooms. So what I do is when I have more spent blooms than blooming, even though there's still a little bit of color on it, I just give the whole thing a haircut. So this one is evergreen. The foliage will stay evergreen on it. So I just take these little hairy like stems and cut them down to the foliage of the plant. And then what I like to do is take these stems like this and just tap them on the ground, or go like that and scatter those seeds, because a lot of times they will reseed, and free is good. So yeah, I just come in and cut those off, tidy it up. So you can see a few little blooms coming right down in here. There's a little one starting, and there's one, but that will have a bigger flush of growth. This is an amazing little perennial. I mean, it's January and it's blooming. So it will bloom almost 12 months out of the year, especially on a mild winter. I'm going to show you a couple varieties of sedum. This particular variety is called, and there will be a test, Sedum capshaticum. So this still looks fairly good, but again, it's got some spent blooms, it's got some damage, so it just gets cut down to the ground. Usually our freezes are enough to knock the whole plant back down, and there's no mistaking what you need to cut. So I just cut back to the crown of the plant, and it will send up all new growth again. So you can kind of see down here the little rosettes forming at the base. That will come back and form the new plant, and it will just be nice and clean and tidy. But the cool thing about this plant, again, take any of these stems, stick them in the ground, and as long as you got a little leaf node underground, you got free plants. And then this particular variety is called Sedum reflexum. Maybe blue spruce sedum or something like that. This one here is evergreen. There's really nothing you need to do with this plant. It does send up a little yellow bloom on it. As a matter of fact, give me 1 second and I will show you what the bloom looks like. So it will send up these little bloom spikes like this. When they're done blooming and they're spent and kind of crispy on the end, you can cut those off down at the base and toss those away. So that'll just make it a little tidier for you. But you know, enjoy the blooms and let the bees enjoy those blooms. But other than that, it just has kind of this carpet of gray, green foliage. Oh, and here's another sedum right here. This one is called Sedum potassium. Oh, and also again, with any sedum, if you stick it in the ground, it will root and grow. So this is Sedum potassium, and again, it has that just little low growing greenish gray growth, and I love to plant it around rocks. It just kind of hugs in around the rocks, but you do nothing to it. It does bloom a little white bloom a little bit later in the season, and when it's done blooming, you can cut those off or not. They'll just kind of fade back into the plant. So this here is called Millennium Allium. If I had my shears, this one here just cut off at the ground, and it will send up all new growth again. Again, we haven't had a hard enough freeze to really knock these back, but it blooms later in the season, so I want all new growth on this instead of a mixture of the old and the new. You will have the same look as this with garlic chives. Garlic chives bloom here in the fall, like September time frame. And same thing, even if they have any green on them right now, just cut them down in the ground and get all new fresh growth. And when they're blooming, take a taste of those little white blooms. Oh my goodness, they are so spicy, garlicky flavored. They're just amazing. Now I want to talk about this perennial called Henry Dulberg salvia. It's a Salvia farinaceae. There's other varieties of it, but this variety will grow about 3 feet tall and get big, long blue spike blooms on it. So here's the pruning technique to this plant. Take your shears, chop it off at the ground. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's new growth coming right here at the bottom. So, but one thing I want to point out about this plant is that is the pruning technique for a couple times more through the season. So this plant will start coming up in March, and by April it will be blooming. It will bloom all of April, all of May, and then it starts looking what I call leggy, where the bottom foliage seems to die away, and then you just have top growth. So I call that leggy. Just grab your shears, chop it to the ground, And within a few weeks, it will be back up and blooming again. So don't be afraid to cut this plant as many times as you need to keep it looking good. So again, it will probably, you'll do it in February, you'll probably do it again in late May, early June, and then you'll probably do it again maybe late August, early September to get it ready for that fall flush of blooms. So same technique every time, just chop it to the ground. All right, now I'm going to talk about pruning Mexican bush sage or Salvia leucantha. So this is a fall bloomer, gets these purple velvety like blooms on it and attracts butterflies like nothing else. So it doesn't come back from here, it comes back from the crown. So what you do is grab your pruners and you just come down to the ground and you cut, they're quite large stems, but you come down there and you cut all that growth off, old growth. One thing I wanted to point out, when you're pruning, sometimes you're going to see wasps that have formed nests within your plant. So just approach them carefully. Make sure you don't have any live wasps on it while you're pruning. This time of year that you shouldn't have live ones, but they love to nestle down in the Salvia greggii and they'll get you. When you get down to the smaller stems, then you can just take your hedge trim or your shears and just come in then and chop it down to the ground. And clear all that away. So then that will be sending up all new growth. And that's a dried up one, but you'll get those beautiful velvety purple blooms in the fall. Okay, now I want to show you a holly fern. Holly ferns are evergreen, but they do sustain some freeze damage here and there. Some winters more than others. So on these mild winters where we haven't had a lot of damage, what I do is I'll just come here and see how we have this brown stem right here. I will come down there and cut that off at the base of the plant and remove that. So I just kind of work my way around and pull back and cut any of those old damaged stems. The one thing that you do need to be careful for, if you do this a little bit too late, February is a great time to do it. If you do it a little bit too late, like into March, what you need to watch for at the base of the plant are the little fiddleheads coming up, because you've got to be careful that you don't cut those. Now, some years, if we've had, again, that sustained cold in the 20s for days, and we get that once in a while, you will have more look like this than you will this. And all I do with that is I take my shears, I come in, I just chop the whole thing to the ground, and then it will send up new growth. I've also had it happen where I have cut the whole thing down, all the little fiddleheads are coming up, and we get that random late freeze and it burns all those fiddleheads to the ground again. Fear not, the plant will come back. If they're tough, they will come back. On these mild winters, it's a little tedious, so I just come in and snip and tidy it up, and it's already got some new growth coming right here, so that's kind of fun. Now on wood ferns that are deciduous, they will turn brown with their first freeze, and you just cut those to the ground to get those cleaned up. Now I'm going to show liriope. This is variegated liriope, and it doesn't have a lot of damage on it, but you can see, for instance, on this stem right here, it's kind of got some tip burn on it, and that could be either from last summer, if it got a little too dry, or maybe with the freeze. And here's a little damage on that one right there, if you can see that. So the way to handle all liriope is, you can do it with your hand shears, pruners, or shears. And what I do is to come in here, well, that's not gonna work. I'll do this. Just come in here and cut it to the ground. That way you have all new fresh growth in the springtime. And the key to this plant is make sure you get it pruned before the new growth comes, because if you wait and accidentally cut that, what happens is, pretend this is a little new growth that's coming, you accidentally cut that off. This is what the edge of your liriope is going to look like all year. It's all going to be flat topped. So you want that pointed end. So earlier is better. It doesn't matter whether it's the green ground cover type or this variegated type, cut them to the ground, and that gets rid of any spent blooms, any tattered edges, and it's nice, new, fresh, clean growth. So if you have the green ground cover type, you can actually take a weed eater to it and just buzz it all down to the ground. Doesn't have to be pretty or even uniform, just it will all grow back up and cover any of that tattered cutting and be great. And it's just once a year. Is tropical giant spider lily, Hymenocallis spider lily. It's different from Lycoris spider lily, but anyway, it's kind of like a crinum, only better. So you can see this has sustained a lot of freeze damage. So what we're going to do is cut this down to the ground. And these work great for doing that because these stems down at the ground are going to be full of a lot of moisture, kind of like a canna. They're going to be very mushy down at the bottom. So just go in and cut them down. If you have an elephant ear, it'll be the same principle. They're probably a pile of mush right now. You can just go in and cut those thick stems down. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but they say that working in your yard will burn about 300 calories an hour. So if you need to get rid of some Christmas treats, this will do it. Way better than the gym. But you can see the size of those stems. These are great to throw in the compost pile because they're so wet. They really will break down great in your compost. Just keep working your way through the clump. I will say if you use drip irrigation, be careful that you don't have any tubes running through that you accidentally slice through. Clean all your debris away, and then it will stand up all new growth when it's done freezing and the time is right. There you go.